Does Traditionis Custodes pass Liturgical History 101? This is an article by Dom Alcuin Reid, because this current priest, who was a deacon and a monk previously, has been in the news lately. Here he is, Dom Alcuin Reid. So he's the founding prior of the Monastère Saint-Benoît, which I didn't know, even though I started supporting this monastery maybe a couple of years ago without having any idea who the founder was. And he's very famous liturgist. He has his principal work being the Organic Development of the Liturgy by Ignatius Press, which has a preface by Joseph Cardinal Ratzinger, which, for those who don't know, was and is Pope Benedict XVI. So he's always considered Orthodox, very liturgically aware, and he's the man. Anyways, so he's been in the news lately because I'm going to cover it on a different video, because he got himself ordained a priest by a Vatican prelate in defiance of his own bishop, who was threatening basically not to ordain him in the traditional rite because of that piece of garbage legislation of Jorge Bergoglio, popularly known as Pope Francis, called Traditionis Custodes. And we're getting back to this again. I did like a 3-4 hour video on it a couple of times already, but this is just an article of Dom Alcuin Reid, and this one is actually the newsletter from the monastery, which I should actually invigorate my support for them, because they chose the faith and chose tradition with the support of the Vatican prelate, to keep the true faith and the true Roman rite alive. And as did Dom Guéranger for Saint Madeleine and Le Barou. So anyways, so this is the monastery he's the founder of, one of the founders. It's in southern France. But let's get into this right now. So this does Traditionis Custodes pass the liturgical history. And this was, I guess, reprinted again after the congregation of worship or something tried to even go far beyond even what Traditionis Custodes tried to pass. Basically, what people don't know is this so-called motu proprio of Jorge is trying to suppress basically the ancient Roman rite, the real Roman rite, in favor of the novelty of the innovation of the rite of Paul VI. And basically saying the fake Roman rite, the Paul VI rite, is the only law of prayer of the Church, because that reflects the law of belief of the Spirit of Vatican II. Meaning that the ancient liturgy does not reflect the law of belief of the Church of the Council. Which, of course, then you have to say, well, what if that's true, then which law of belief should I adhere to? The post-1970 law of belief, or the law of faith of 1970 years before? So if you have a brain in your head, you'd know the answer. So it starts off by saying legislation cannot change historical facts, nor can an act of legal positivism. That's the problem with the Roman rite Catholics, is they're very legalistic, kind of like, unlike the Eastern Church, they're not as legalistic, but these are very legalistic. And they go, well, is it like the code, and the code says, and the code that, and then we find little loopholes so we don't have to fast, or loopholes so we don't have to do this. And so yeah, legal positivism, instead of saying following apostolic tradition or the ancient practice of the Church, which is far more important than legal positivism. I have the right, therefore I can do. Not really. So nor can an act of legal positivism determine what is or is not part of the lex orandi, the law of prayer of the Church, because that's what Traditionis Custodes and the letter after it and all the supporters of this illegal attempted suppression of the ancient rite basically harp on that. Oh yeah, the new liturgy reflects the new faith. Well, I don't want the new faith. I want the old faith. Thank you very much. Anyways, this is Cardinal Brandmuller at the celebrating the real Roman Rite. So, anyways, so he says this originally was posted in August 2021 when this article came out, Traditionis Custodes, and reprinted again. Anyway, so let's get into the actual article. And I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm going to put a link to it so you can just go and reread the whole thing yourself. But basically, Dom Alcuin says, let's not pretend that this is anything about, faith or, anything historical or anything. It is really, all it is it is nothing other than a political ecclesiastical war. That's what it is, a political ecclesiastical war. There is a war, a civil war in the church. Those who hold on to the tradition, as St. Paul says, keep the traditions which you have received, whether by word, meaning custom, or by mouth, by letter, meaning the scriptures. And those who want to basically, as Cardinal Ratzinger told the Chilean bishops in 1988, people think, okay, Vatican II is a start from zero and everything before it is meaningless, and Vatican II is a super council and it's a super dogma and it's a start from zero. And even though, as Cardinal Ratzinger, head of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, who became Pope Benedict XVI, said, even though Vatican II itself restricted itself to being on a what's his word he used, on a merely restricted itself in being a merely pastoral council, which defined no dogma. All right. So, anyways, so he says, look, the bishops and above all the Pope are not creators of the liturgy. They are the guardians of her tradition, of her living tradition. So the liturgy is the tradition of the church, is the passing on of the faith. When somebody says, well, what's the pillars of the faith? The twin pillars of Christianity is faith and tradition, is scripture and tradition. And part of tradition isn't just the writings of the fathers or the saints. It is as well, and above all else, I would say, the ancient liturgies. Why? Because the ancient liturgies passed on the tradition of the earliest Christians. What they prayed and how they prayed and what they said and what they believed is reflected in the liturgy. So the liturgies, the ancient, not made up stuff in the 1970s by a committee, the ancient liturgies are a font of faith, are a pillar of the faith. And he deals with the charge that, oh yeah, the liturgy in the Middle Ages was corrupted. Oh, it was and all these additionals happened to the liturgy. But actually, if you look at, and he says, let's start with the supposed medieval corruption of the liturgy. And he says that theory, that became fashionable among mid-20th century liturgists, was the theory of Joseph Jungmann, S.J. Society of Jesus. This is a Jesuit. Actually, I do have his. Where is it here? Back behind me. Where are you, Mr. Jungmann? Oh, here we go. I guess he had other books, but I kind of went over these a while back. Back in the day. Oh, man, making a big mess here behind me. All right, here we go. What did I drop on the floor here? All right. So, anyways, here, the Mass of the Roman Rite by Joseph Jungmann, S.J. It's a 2-volume set. You do find some gold in it too, like about the ancient sacramentaries and so forth. Well, I mean, it's not all bad. It actually has a lot of good stuff. But the idea that the liturgy was corrupted from a simple, pure, very simple form is a lie. You look at all, and I repeat, all the ancient liturgies, East and West, Ethiopic, Coptic, Armenian, Assyrian, Chaldean, Maronite, traditional Maronite, not the fake Reformed Maronite, Roman, the real Roman Rite, and so forth. They're all very elaborate and very long. Actually, the more ancient, the longer. The more ancient, the more apostolic tradition is still held. Like, for example, there would be the curtains between the altar and the people, and that matches the curtains of the temple. And you see women sitting on one side, men sitting on the other side, again matching the prescriptions of the temple. You know, the court of the women, court of the men. And actually, the 1917 Code of Canon Law of the Catholic Roman Church actually does say the ancient tradition of having women sit on one side and men sit on the other side should be maintained, even though nobody maintained it, but it actually is at least in the code. Let me kind of adjust my camera here for a second. Well, let's hope that's better. But anyways, so that's where these ideas of the very simple supper of the Lord's Supper, which is basically Protestant innovation, novelty of the 16th century. So this, he says, the theory is sometimes called Antiquarianism. I mean, for me, let's go to real Antiquarianism, meaning following the most ancient forms of the liturgy, adding, you know, again, the customs, adding back the root screen, adding back the curtains and the screens and the you know, the court of the side of the man, the side of the women, reinvigorate the parts of the church for the virgins and the widows, which are the nuns, kind of like the older, and reinstate all the ancient, actually use the minor orders, which actually the Council of Trent itself says the minor orders should be actually practiced as without remuneration, other than if you're, I think, a subdeacon, deacon, or a priest. But these people should be installed like a porter, an acolyte, an exorcist, and a lector, and have these orders functional, not just like like steps to the priesthood as in traditional orders, which is okay. Like, let's ordain him a lector, let's ordain him an acolyte, let's ordain him an exorcist until he gets to become a priest, because these mean nothing. No, they need to be maintained and actually used. We would have no problems. Then you have the porter who has the keys of the church, keeps an eye on, especially security wise these days, who comes in, who doesn't come in, and how do they sit, you know, somebody in authority. Anyways, so I'm not gonna, so that for me would be true good antiquarianism. But what he calls here is antiquarianism is those, basically they denigrate all liturgical forms which grew in the church over 1,000 years, and they say, I don't know. So he says, this is such insolence. Are you telling me that the Holy Spirit did not inspire the church for 1,000 years until, so this is a staggering arrogance. But it's political too. That, I mean, they use that. It's like, oh yeah, all of this was corruption for 1,000 years, for 1,400 years, corruption. But now we, the enlightened few, are going to restore the pristine norms of the Holy Father, the pristine liturgy of the ancients, which is, of course, a bunch of, you know what. Anyways, apparently they wanted the utter and complete destruction of the Roman Rite, that even Pope Paul VI, of unhappy memory, who is no wise as a saint, resisted the harshest implications, which were what? They wanted Pope Paul VI to abolish the Roman canon, which is the central prayer of the Mass, the most ancient part of the Mass. They wanted it abolished. Well, and then of course they wanted to abolish the Confiteor, which is the I confess to Almighty God, to you, my brothers and sisters, that I have sinned. But it's the traditional Confiteor, not the one which is currently said without all the mention of all the saints and so forth. The Orate Fratres, here, pray my brothers that my sacrifice and yours may be acceptable. So he says, and a whole bunch of other things. Apparently they wanted completely abolished from the Mass. So in practice, one may argue they were abolished nevertheless, because the Roman canon, how often is that said? the long canon, long prayer. Very, very rarely, maybe once a year in a church, maybe twice a year. Easter and Christmas, maybe, with a more traditional kind of a priest. Other than that, you never hear the Roman canon. So basically, it's been abolished, whether in fact or in practice. In practice, it basically has been pretty much abolished. And the confession, confiteor, again, it's they eliminated the basically the one before Holy Communion was eliminated in 1962, which should be restored. And it became mishmash of the people and the priest together, instead of the priest by himself asking the people for their prayer, and then the prayer and the people confessing, asking the priest for his absolution. Anyways, so even Paul VI said, okay, that's enough. We can't even go further than that. And why am I dwelling on this? Well, we have to understand that not because a pope says, okay, you can no longer pray as you did for 1,000 years, therefore, okay, let's follow what the pope said. And the pope is not a walking God. The pope has to obey. He is, I have a couple of videos, even Yves Conrad, a modernist, says even the pope obeys. Pope Benedict XVI says the pope obeys. He is not a absolute monarch whose will, his whims, his desires are law. No, he's bound. He is not a walking God. Even God himself, Christ Jesus himself, is bound to what has always been taught, or what he himself has taught. He cannot suddenly change his mind. He's not like the God of Muhammad, where, okay, one day he says that, and then the next day he completely contradicts himself. What was forbidden now it's okay, and just, contradicts himself, and he's the God, he's the a God of pure will. Okay, I want it this way. Why? Oh, because that's the way it is. And tomorrow it could be completely different. Why? Because I said so. That's it. But we have a rational God, the true God. So first, that the liturgy is the primary. So this is what they use, the promoters of the deforms. So, well, anyways, but first, he says, the liturgy is the primary and indispensable source from which the faithful are to derive the true Christian spirit. And who said that? It wasn't Vatican II. It was way before then. And that true participation in it was essential for all, was asserted by St. Pius X in 1903. So way before the spirit of Vatican II and active participation came into vogue. And of course, they were talking about participation and getting into far deeper understanding of the liturgy. Which liturgy? What liturgy? The liturgy as it then was, meaning the real rite of the Roman Church, or the real rite of the Armenian Church, or the real rite of the Ethiopic Church, or the real rite of the Coptic Church, and so forth. So he says, well, I understand, some participation could be more facilitated with a modest introduction of some vernacular, which they did sometimes in the 1950s. So they began in the 1950s to do these innovations. And actually, just give me 1 second here. Here. In this book of The Destroyer of the Roman Rite, I have a book review on this, Annibale Bonini, The Destroyer of the Roman Rite. These novelties and innovations started way before the 1950s, actually. All these experiments, actually he mentions them here, liturgical experiments of priests, and it's like, they turn the altar, the priest faces the people like in a meal, instead of facing east, like in every church, east and west, from the beginning. And all these started even before the 1950s as experimental of the liturgists, the fake liturgists. So he says, look, now this section is on Vatican II and the implementation of the reform, because what they do is they say, do you deny Vatican II? Deny what? Like, what did Vatican II command me to obey as a matter of faith? The simple answer is nothing. Nothing. There is no dogma. There is no doctrine in Vatican II that I must obey. Even so-called ecumenism in Vatican II, what goes along goes around today as ecumenism is in fact condemned at Vatican II, and it is called false Irenicism. You can go look it up. False Irenicism is basically what goes around as ecumenism these days. So he says, like, look, and the group which was used to formulate these new rites, the fake Roman rites, was called the Concilium, and the head of the Concilium was Annibale. I think the head, or I think was the cardinal was the head, but really the guy running the whole show was Annibale Bonini, which I showed you the book in just a seconds ago. And he says that this Concilium went well beyond the reform envisaged by the council, and produced rites that owed more to the desires of key players of the Concilium than they did to the principles of the council's constitution on the sacred liturgy. So they made up their own stuff. And actually he says, look, the secretary, Concilium Secretary Father Bonini, which I showed you his book there, himself boasts in his memoirs of exceeding the council's mandates. And I can't remember where I said, whether it's his own writings or somewhere else, that is, they said they actually put vague things in Vatican II so they can actually use these vague things, these vague statements, to implement what they wanted. But if they said what they wanted, it would have been rejected at Vatican II. So they had to put it in a vague manner. So afterwards they would say, well, we were following the council, and make up their own stuff. So he says, look, because given the fact that these deforms went beyond the council's mandate, it is historically and liturgically true to say that they are the liturgical books of Paul VI, not of the Second Vatican Council. And on this basis, it is legitimate to question their continuity with liturgical tradition. Now, when the Knights of Malta, when they removed Cardinal Burke from them, and they removed the head of the Knights of Malta because Jorge Bergoglio, aka Pope Francis, basically hates everything traditional, and forced them to return to the liturgical deforms of Vatican II, because they were going into the traditional rites again. The new appointed head of the Knights of Malta, the order taken over by the Vatican, which was supposed to be a sovereign order, he himself calls it, we are now going to be using the rite of Paul VI, the rite of Paul VI, and which is absolutely accurate. It is not the Roman rite. It is the rite of Paul VI, because even Paul VI in his own, which I did videos on, the two latter presentations of Paul VI in 1969, I believe, he himself compares the Roman Missal to the new rite, and that's exactly what he says: the Roman Missal and the new rite. He even calls the new rite, he calls it innovation, novelty, annoyance, will cause a lot of disturbance about his own fake Roman rite. And the other thing is Cardinal Ratzinger, who is Pope Benedict XVI, was an expert at Vatican II. And he himself, in his French edition introduction, which you can find online, because I think it was such a controversial introduction that it was removed from later editions, but you can still find the full his introduction, basically for the book The Reform of the Roman Liturgy, Its Problems and Background, by Monsignor Klaus Gamber. So in the French edition, of the original French edition, Cardinal Ratzinger, head of the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith, main mover and shaker at Vatican II of the modernists, of the more progressives, himself says, all these reforms we were thinking were going to be such great fruits to the church, such greatness. But what happened after the council was actually the exact opposite. Instead of a springtime, we have basically a winter. Instead of giving us all these reformed rites, instead of giving us bread, they give us actually stones. These are the words he uses: stones instead of bread The fake Roman Rite gave us stones instead of bread. And this whole thing, this whole production was a fabrication, a fabricated liturgy, a banal on-the-spot product, no organic development, no progress, no nothing. A clear break with the tradition of the church. So, a fake Roman Rite, period. And here he says, the new, more recent use of the Roman Rite, meaning the fake one, is an innovation. And actually, it's not the opinion of Dom Alcuin Reid himself. Paul VI himself calls it a novelty, an unprecedented novelty and innovation. And not, he said something, it is not a small thing. This is what's happening now, is not a small thing. For all those people saying, oh, well, we just translated some things. I wish it was just that. If all they did was simply even go 100%, not vernacular, but official, high English or high French, kind of a literal, what's the word? Kind of a quality language, high language in the vernacular, I wouldn't have too much of a problem, even though you lose a lot of the ancient, even the chants could be, in a way, adjusted to the real vernacular, but we wouldn't have too much of a problem because the rite itself is maintained. We're not talking about the rite. We're not talking about the language here. We're talking about the rite. The actual prayers have been altered. Every prayer has been altered. A lot of the orations have been changed to water them down, and it's a destruction of the rite, destruction of the faith. The law of prayer, that's what they were saying. The lex orandi of the church has been altered completely to make it more Protestant, more non-Catholic, more non-Christian, because it is no longer apostolic. So he says, look, even the Catechism of the Catholic Church says no sacramental rite may be modified. No sacramental rite, meaning the rite of Mass, a rite of confession, rite of ordination, rite of all 7 sacraments, or manipulated at the will of the minister. Wasn't recently they found this priest who so-called baptized, I don't know, tens of thousands of people, and it turns out that they were all invalidly baptized, so they're not even Christians. Recently, like, I don't know, a few months back. Because he innovated at his own discretion, made up his own baptismal formula. And people are so ignorant of the faith that all of these tens of thousands of people never recognize that their babies, their children, were not really getting baptized. It's fake baptism. Or the community. So this no sacramental rite may be modified or manipulated at the will of the minister or the community. That's from the Catechism of the Catholic Church, the Catechism of John Paul II, of Saint John Paul II. Even the supreme authority, meaning the Pope, a legitimate Pope, a valid Pope in the Church, even a valid Pope, a supreme authority in the Church, may not change the liturgy arbitrarily. But what happened after Vatican II? It wasn't all arbitrarily. Let's delete all these prayers. Let's change them. And it wasn't really truly arbitrary. There was a plan. And the plan is, as Bonini himself says, was to remove everything Catholic which was offensive to our separated brethren. Not the Eastern Orthodox, not the Oriental Orthodox, who share virtually the same faith. No, it is to the Protestant sects who rejected a ton of the faith, which is accepted by the Orthodox. Sacrificial priest, the sacrifice of the Mass, sacrificial priesthood, the ordained ministerial priesthood, the 7 orders of the Church, or the hierarchy of the Church, the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist, the true presence of Christ in the Eucharist, even the notion of the various punishments for sins, the eternity of hell. All these things have been modified and removed and watered down to please not the Eastern Orthodox, not the Oriental Orthodox, no, to please the heretical Protestant sects. So, but only in the obedience of faith, and with religious respect for the mystery of the liturgy. So only in the obedience of faith may the liturgy be slightly changed. But again, if it is coming down to us for 1500, 1600 years, 1700 years, 1900 years, obedience of faith is to maintain it, because it has passed on the faith. It is not to destroy the faith by removing everything in the faith which was offensive to our separated brethren. And this from the Catechism of Vatican II, the Catechism of John Paul II, actually echoes, which I mentioned in many other videos, the creed, the profession of faith of the Council of Trent, the profession which was repeated as the profession of faith of Vatican Council I, which as well is mentioned in one of the canons. In the creed it says basically that you hold on to the received and approved apostolic, the rights of the Catholic Church used in the administration of the sacrament, the received rights, the traditional rights. You embrace them and you hold them. You follow them. That's part of the faith, is to actually hold on to the received and approved ancient rights used in the administration of the sacraments. That's what the creed says. So to do otherwise, to change them and alter them and make new ones, is going against the faith, against the creed. And actually the Council of Trent itself, in one of the canons, I can't remember which one now, says basically that nobody, no one whatsoever may alter the liturgy or the rites used in the administration of the sacraments. No one whatsoever, at his own will. No one whatsoever, meaning including the Pope himself. Supreme authority, as here is stated. So, and as I said before, the first time a Pope actually interfered in the liturgy was Pope St. Pius V after the Council of Trent. Prior in 1500 years. So for 1500 years, no Pope actually interfered in the liturgical legislation. This is the missal to be used. This is not the missal to be used. None of that. It was always passed on by tradition. The different churches, different cathedrals had even slightly different rites, but all Catholic, all apostolic, reflecting the genius and the holiness of the various peoples. And I remember reading in one of the books behind me here, I think it was Saint I think it was Bede, talking about the evangelization of the English, the church in England or something. It talks about, I think, St. Augustine coming to England and then noticing that they celebrated Mass slightly differently, because apparently there was some Christians before him. So I think he asked St. Gregory the Great, if I'm not mistaken now, it's from past memory, what he should do. Should he stop this or do that? He said, well, as long as everything going in a Christian way, just leave it as is. But he just suggested that the only thing he should maintain from the Roman rite as he knew it is to have the Roman canon. I could be mistaken. I read it many years ago. Other than that, they're free. And again, the other thing was the tonsure, how they cut their hair. That was another controversy. But that's it. But yeah, so you have the different rites of the West. And only after Council of Trent, and even Pius V didn't actually impose his right upon any church. He was dealing only with the Roman Church in the city of Rome, the Roman Curia. That's it. And then he said, well, anybody wanting to use my missal can use my missal. And that's it. So, and then what happened is because of the Protestant revolt and all these different princes, and so they show loyalty, they abandoned their own liturgical heritage and took on the Roman rite. In my opinion, that's bad. They should have maintained their tradition. As long as Pius V said it's over 200 years old, maintain it if you want to. It's not if you want to. They should have maintained it because it's part of their heritage, not if they wanted to. So that's the first time actually a pope interfered in the liturgy. And actually in Monsieur Klaus Gamber here again, approved by Cardinal Ratzinger, head of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, and he praised him as one of the real liturgists of the 20th century, unlike all these innovators of the past. Let me see if I can quickly find it, because he actually has something very important to say about this. In one of his... because it's a question of, does a pope have a right to change the liturgy? He says here, not only is the Ordo... I don't know if you can see this. Anyways, not only is the Ordo Missae of 1969 a change in the liturgical rite, meaning it's no longer the Roman rite, but that change also involved the rearrangement of the liturgical year. Now you have the ordinary time and not the ordinary time. That doesn't exist in any traditional liturgy. East or West. It's always Pentecost, post-Pentecost, whatever. He says, the countless innovations introduced as part of the liturgical reform have left hardly any of the traditional liturgical forms intact. So meaning it's a total destruction. A total destruction. So if you're too young to understand, this is a total destruction of the Roman Rite. And unfortunately, a lot of Eastern rites are following into this road of destruction, like the Maronites and the Chaldeans. They're again following the same route. Since, this is important here, since there is no document that specifically assigns the Apostolic See the authority to change, let alone to abolish the traditional liturgical rite, and since furthermore it can be shown that not a single predecessor of Pope Paul VI has ever introduced major changes to the Roman liturgy, the assertion that the Holy See has the authority to change the liturgical rite would appear to be debatable, to say the least. Meaning, no, they don't have the right to do so. Not only debatable. He says, the first duty of the Pope, is to act as primary bishop, to watch over the traditions of the Church, her dogmatic, moral, and liturgical traditions. Because there's one really important point. He says, well, maybe there's an argument for a pope being able to introduce a new rite, but there's no way a pope has an authority to abolish an ancient rite. There's nothing like that in history. And he says, people say, oh, well, it's following the discipline of the church. These are under the powers of the Pope. They're following the discipline of the church. He is the guardian of the discipline of the church. He says, discipline of the church does not involve the liturgy. The liturgy is not part of the discipline of the church. Discipline is like, when to fast, when not to fast, and so forth. It's not punishments. It's not the liturgical rite. I make up my own rite and call it because I want it to, so I'll do it. He says, in fact, there are several authors who state quite explicitly that it is clearly outside the Pope's scope of authority to abolish the traditional rite. Thus, the eminent theologian Suarez, who died in 1617, citing even earlier authors such as Cajetan, who died in 1534, took the position that the Pope would be a schismatic if he, as is his duty, would not be in full communion with the body of the church, as for example, if he were to excommunicate the entire church, which would be null and void, or if he were to change, go away, or if he was to change all the liturgical rites of the church that have been upheld by apostolic tradition. So a pope would be a schismatic in that case. And he says somewhere else, okay, I'm not going to search for it, but it's here somewhere. Maybe it's the same section, but I just didn't notice. He says that the Pope, there is not a single, not one, document that actually, not a law, not a canon, not a legislation, not nothing, that gives the Pope the authority to suppress even a local liturgical custom. So he can't go say, hey, you guys are praying the rosary, I'm going to abolish it now, even though it could have been a slight custom at the beginning. No, he can't. So don't have this idea that the Pope is a walking God. In an ideal world, like I was quite a bit younger, the word of the Pope for me was like the word of God himself. Because I grew up, the Pope is the vicar of Christ. He is Christ on earth, which would be true, which is true, as long as he behaves like a true Pope. If he starts to attack, he says, what Christ calls evil, good, and what Christ calls good, evil, or when he attempts to attack the ancient liturgies and disciplines of the church, which have been upheld by martyrs and saints and popes for 2,000 years, then you have to make a choice. Do I follow his will, his corrupted will, which is obviously he is not following the words of Christ, because Christ would have told him, get thee behind me, Satan, like he told St. Peter. Or do I follow the constant teaching of the church, the constant discipline of the church, the constant faith of the church? If you're a true Christian, you know what to do. And he says, look, what happened under John Paul II and Benedict XVI? Of course, he goes through the 1984, the indult. John Paul II said, well, we're going to give a little leeway for those interested in the ancient rite. They celebrate it. And then in 1988, in a response, so this is kind of like amusing in retrospect, because this permission was widened in 1988 with the document Ecclesia Dei et Flicta. And I remember in 1988, I was praying the hardest that Archbishop Lefebvre not consecrate bishops and actually obey Pope John Paul II. And when he did consecrate bishops, I was really, really sad, because I said to myself, that's it. He defied the Pope. He's excommunicated. He's going to hell, even though he kept all the traditions and the sacraments. Now I completely changed my mind. He did the right decision, because as we can see, even today, even after Summorum Pontificum of Benedict XVI, the haters of God, the haters of tradition, the haters of the Christian faith, the haters of apostolic liturgy, the lex orandi law of prayer of the church, are on a rampage. So Archbishop Lefebvre did the right decision, consecrating bishops to keep on the ancient rite. He is the father of the ancient rite. Saint Marcel Lefebvre is the man who prevented the death of the Roman rite. I wish he went back to the complete pure Roman rite of prior to 1955 liturgical deforms of Holy Week, but he didn't. But anyways, 1962 is better than nothing. But he is the man. All traditional orders and societies owe their existence to Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre, either directly or indirectly. Directly, like the Fraternity of St. Peter, like the Institute of the Good Shepherd in France, and others. And indirectly, maybe who came in later, were because he maintained the faith. He created that atmosphere. So anyways, in 1988, Pope John Paul II gave a wider permission for the ancient liturgy and led to the establishment of various parishes, quasi-parishes, where the faith was maintained, the ancient liturgy was maintained. And he calls it the unlawful consecration of bishops. Yeah, technically it was unlawful, but definitely valid and definitely justified. And what is funny is Dom Alcuin Reid himself just recently got an unlawful ordination to the priesthood by a high-ranking Vatican prelate. Some people say Cardinal Mueller. I've seen that on the internet. I don't know if it's true. Some people, I've seen pictures of Dom Alcuin Reid with Cardinal Burke, but I think I'm not sure who ordained him. Could be Vigano. Who knows? Who knows? Honestly, who knows? We will know one day. We will know one day, and I have no doubt he was ordained, definitely, and one of his monks was ordained a deacon. And the reason was the bishop was stalling and actually almost refusing to ordain. Actually, Vatican now basically shut down all ordinations, even in the new rite, in that diocese. I'll do another video on it in the next couple of days. Anyways, so... and what did John Paul II say? That basically what people wanted the ancient rite, these were rightful aspirations. Rightful. It's a right. It's not like, yeah, they're stupid, but hey, we'll give them the right. No, it's rightful aspirations. So he says the full conscious and actual participation in the liturgical rites witnessed in these communities to this day, meaning the traditional communities, something which the Council Father would be proud, have borne significant fruit. Increase of vocations, conversions, baptisms, marriages. And that is the reason for Traditionis Custodes of Jorge Bergoglio, aka Francis, the Bishop of Rome. They saw the huge success, the huge increase in traditional orders, in traditional vocations, in traditional parishes, and increasing criticism of the fake Roman rite of Paul VI. Maybe they should read actually Paul VI himself, what he calls his own fabrication. He calls it novelty, innovation, not a small thing, an annoyance, and so forth. That's Paul VI himself, not me. And they said, well, okay, now it's time to clamp it down. And actually, they didn't even wait. I mean, as soon as Jorge was elected as the Bishop of Rome, he basically went on a destruction mission against the Franciscan Friars of the Immaculate, who were becoming very traditional. Even though they were celebrating still both rites, the real Roman rite and the fake one, but they were moving more and more and more towards the ancient liturgy, and with booming vocations. So, of course, booming vocations to the priesthood, to the religious life, devotion to Mary and the saints. Now that's too Catholic. That would offend our separated brethren, so let's destroy them. And it started right away. So it's not something new. You could see it coming from the beginning if you had eyes to see. And he says, look, even like Cardinal Ratzinger, of course, he tried to improve the liturgy, more correct English language, or more accurate translations of what is being said. But even though Cardinal Ratzinger, Pope Benedict XVI, was harping always about the reform of the liturgical reform, meaning not reforming the ancient liturgy, no, but reforming the fake reform, the deform, which he called stones rather than bread, which Ratzinger called a fabrication, a banal on-the-spot product. So he wanted to fix the unfixable. But he says here, Dom Alcuin Reid, that when he became Pope, the Congregation for Divine Liturgy, this is you could not even mention the term reform of the liturgical reform. Not allowed. Even though Pope Benedict XVI was Pope, he had the right. It reminds you of, again, now we're going to go into a bit of a political kind of equivalency, like Trump. He would tell his military leaders, okay, I want you to remove all the soldiers from Syria, and they say, no, we can't. Or they say, okay, sure. And then they don't. They remove some and then they keep a lot. Or so many times it would happen, he would tell them to do something and they would just contradict him or not do it at all. So same thing with Benedict XVI. He tried to, and they would just ignore what he was saying. And in retrospect, it might be actually good that this reform of the reform failed. And actually that reform of the reform is specifically rejected by Jorge Bergoglio, also known as Francis the Bishop of Rome, and by his his supporters, like in the liturgical schools of the Vatican, who in articles after this motu proprio of Jorge came out, basically says, no, there's no such, we don't want to reform the reform. This is it. That's it. We're not going to reform that. This is utterly to be rejected. And they themselves, they say, the way of prayer of the ancient liturgy is different than the way of prayer in the new liturgy, because and the new liturgy reflects the conciliar church, the conciliar faith, the conciliar orientation, the conciliar ecclesiology, meaning the old rite does not reflect the ecclesiology, the new ecclesiology of the church, the new understanding of the Eucharist of the church, the new whatever of the church. Okay, well, now if you're putting it in such a stark division between the old rite and the new, meaning only the new actually follows the new understanding of the church, then any faithful Catholic would have to say, I reject the new. I will follow the apostolic. I will follow the old, because the old cannot be altered. If you're telling me a new ecclesiology, a new understanding, and a new this and a new that happened after 1969, well, then I have to say, well, I don't want any of that stuff. That's obviously not Christian, obviously not apostolic, obviously not Catholic. So obviously I have to reject it, if you're putting it that way. And they did put it that way after this document. Okay then. No, as Al Bundy would have said, let's rock. Anyways, for those who don't know who Al Bundy is. Al. It's a very not a family friendly show. But you watch it these days. I haven't watched it in years and years. If you watch that show these days, it's like, wow, that's pretty tame compared to what you see on television these days. Even at that time, it was such a shocking television show. So yeah, he says here that, after he became Pope, he couldn't get this reform of the reform thing done, which is good, as I said, because if it was actually accomplished, the fake Roman Rite would have looked a lot more traditional, a lot more holy, So the growth of the traditional Catholic movement, the growth of the ancient Roman Rite, the real Roman Rite, would have stalled. So thank God, the reform of the reform of the deform never happened, making it the distinction between the real Roman Rite and the fake Roman Rite clear and stark. It's the way to go. And these people, these innovators, have this rigid insistence that the liturgical books of Paul VI are irreformable. So something invented by basic heretics in the 1960s, innovators who have no basis in true liturgy, using the fantasy works of Joseph Youngman, that the liturgy in the past was such a simple little meal around the table and eating some bread, that these people, the books of the Paul VI books, are irreformable. But the ancient liturgies of the church, let's see if I have this book, which I've showed it many times before on the thing. Oh, here it is. Writings, Papal Teachings on the Liturgy. And that's like from the 1700s only. And in it you see, and that's been constant, that the liturgy is to be preserved. No innovation is to be allowed. No novelty is to be allowed. That's the constant teaching of the church, not these people. So they're applying the irreformable, untouchable books of Paul VI to a novelty, to a fabrication, to an invention, not to the ancient liturgy, which it should apply to the ancient liturgy. So he mentions that in 2007, Benedict XVI, extended, basically freed the Roman Rite. And it's not really, wasn't truly just Benedict XVI. It was actually thanks to the Society of St. Pius X and Bishop Bernard Fillet, who told Benedict, look, if you want us to start negotiations again for the full integration of the Fraternity of St. Pius X to regularize the fraternity in the society into the church, by getting, canonical status, then there were three things to be done. Number one, I think it was lifting the excommunications, which Benedict XVI did of the four bishops. And actually, if you read the declaration, it is not just the four bishops. Benedict XVI actually basically didn't even lift the excommunication. He basically annulled the excommunication decree. He said from that time, this decree is null and void. It's null. It's as if it didn't exist anymore. Meaning not just the four bishops, which were consecrated by Archbishop Lefebvre, whose excommunication was lifted, but actually Archbishop Lefebvre and Bishop de Castro-Mayer himself. So, number one, that was excommunication lifted. Number two was, I believe it was the freeing of the Roman Rite, the traditional Latin Mass, to be freely used by all priests. So the Society of St. Pius X wanted all priests of the Roman Rite to be free to celebrate the Roman Rite. How weird is that? A Roman Rite priest allowed to celebrate the Roman Rite. Wow. And then the third condition, I can't remember at the moment. There was three. So Benedict did basically, I think two or all three, I can't remember. But that was the decision for 2007. It was 7/7/2007. It was 7th of July, 7th of the 7th month of the year 2007. And basically said, look, any priest of the Roman Rite can say the ancient Roman Rite. That's it. You don't need to ask your bishop and ask permission and dispensation, none of that stuff. And actually, Benedict himself says, look, the ancient rite has never been abrogated. The Missal of 1962 and the ancient rites have never been abrogated, meaning abolished. And thusly, they were always, in principle, allowed. So basically, what he just said is basically since 1969, all these disobedient priests and bishops celebrating the ancient liturgy were not disobeying anybody, because in principle, the ancient rite was allowed because it was never abrogated. And in the document of Jorge, Traditionis Custodes, it is never abrogated. And any such abrogation, if he comes up tomorrow and says, I, Jorge, Bishop of Rome, the bishop dressed in white, who is so humble I have to have cameras following me everywhere, showing me kiss the feet of politicians and of weird people at the Holy Thursday liturgies and so forth. And magically cameras are there showing me magically going into a store, by surprise. And the cameras caught me by surprise visit to a hospital because I'm so humble that cameras don't even know. Suddenly cameras are there catching me all the time. So if tomorrow Jorge says, I hereby, Jorge, Bishop of Rome, the bishop dressed in white, the most holy and the most humble of humblest, the humblest humbler of humblers, I hereby abrogate, abolish, annihilate the ancient Roman rite of 1962-1955. I only allow the real, the rite of Vatican II to exist. And I allow any innovation emanating from that, like the Amazonian rite or whatever, from the books of the most holy and venerable of popes of all time, Paul VI. I do so, hereby do so. That would be null and void. Sorry, buddy. You can do whatever you want. You can say whatever you want. We'll just ignore that because you do not have the authority. Again, I did a couple of videos. One was on Pope St. Victor and the Eastern bishops. You should watch a lot more of my videos. I've got lots of good stuff in them. In it, Pope St. Victor, that's in year 157 or something. So it's like basically apostolic times, immediately post-apostolic. And he knew he had the power. He knew he was the man. He was the Bishop of Rome. He had authority even over Eastern bishops, Asian, like in Turkey and so forth, throughout the world. And no bishop said, no, you don't have the authority. But they refused to obey. What he did, he said, look, I want you people in Asia Minor to celebrate the Feast of the Resurrection on a Sunday like the Roman custom. And the Eastern bishop said, we have innovated in nothing, which shows you that even from the very time, innovation was frowned upon, was something to be rejected, no novelty. They said, we innovated in nothing. We followed what we have received. And what we have received from John the Apostle. And this is the day St. John the Apostle celebrated the resurrection, and that's the day we will keep. And Pope Victor, Saint Victor, told them, look, if you don't obey me, I will excommunicate all of you. I will, threaten them with excommunication, banishment, on all. I think it's excommunication. Basically, look, you must obey or you are all out of the church. You are excommunicated, all the lot of you. Basically excommunicating half the church. And they said, look, they quoted St. Peter back to the successor of St. Peter. They said, somebody greater than us once said, we'd rather obey God rather than men. And they did not follow the command of Pope St. Victor to just simply alter the day of the celebration of Easter, the Feast of Resurrection. That's it. Not altering the whole liturgy and their customs. No. And St. Irenaeus and others, fathers, backed the Eastern Fathers. And that came to naught. And I believe he tried to excommunicate them, sent excommunication letters, but they were just dead letters. They were utterly rejected. And I have another book on, and this one you can see the story in Eusebius' History of the Church. You can find that, the full account of this. And then there's, I did a whole review of book of St. Vincent of Lerins, who says, what we have to believe is what was always taught, was taught everywhere, by all, and basically says you have to always maintain the traditions. It doesn't matter. Even if a majority of the church, even if almost all the church falls away, you keep what is the ancient, because the ancient is always true. So he says Benedict XVI. So he talks about So people say, these acts of Pope Benedict XVI were contrary to the council, and Jorge and his junta always say, we're following the council. You don't reject the Vatican II. Don't reject the council. They know nothing about Vatican II. They were not participants in Vatican II. Jorge, the bishop, the Argentinian bishop dressed in white, was never part of Vatican II. Benedict Ratzinger was one of the main people of Vatican II. So he knows Vatican II in and out. And you're telling me that he doesn't follow the council and he doesn't understand Vatican II? Well, he understands more than any of them, because he actually tried to clear as much as possible some of the vagueness in Vatican II through what he called the hermeneutic of continuity. And that, he said, Pope Benedict said, that's the only, and not of rupture. He said that's when in his speech to the Chilean bishops, he said, look, a lot of people go with rupture. Vatican II is a start from zero. Everything is new from Vatican II, which is absolutely garbage. He said, if you do that, then there is no legitimacy to Vatican II. It's an illegitimate council if that's the attitude you take. He said the only way to make Vatican II legitimate is to make it part of all the council of the church, of a continuance, not a novelty, not a rupture. To make it rupture, you render Vatican II illegitimate. That's basically, in so many words, what Cardinal Ratzinger, Benedict XVI, said to the Chilean bishops, I believe, in 1988. So anyways, so he said Benedict XVI himself didn't celebrate the ancient liturgy, at least publicly. He did it once for the Fraternity of St. Peter. But he recognized the value of the ancient rite and the attraction it has for the young. So he says Dom Alcuin Reid says it was unimaginable that any successor, well, let's put it this way, any true and valid successor of Pope Benedict XVI would rescind Summorum Pontificum. But did Jorge rescind it? Well, in a sense he did, by making it more difficult to celebrate the ancient liturgy, but he never actually abrogated the ancient rite. So it was basically, if even before Summorum Pontificum, as Benedict XVI himself says, the ancient rite was never abrogated and thus always permissible, and who cares? So we're almost, whatever. I'm talking too much as per usual. I gotta cut my videos to like 20 minutes. Quickie, 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 bam, 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 and that's it. But unfortunately, I cannot. So that's the way it is. You like, you like. You don't like, I have nothing I can do about it. Even though I have a sore throat today, I had to gargle. Anyways, the virtual versus the on-ground realities. So what are these innovators say? Oh, so the stated motivation. Of course, that's not the true motivation. The true motivation is basically they hate the ancient liturgy because it reflects in lex orandi. The lex orandi, the law of prayer of the ancient rite, reflects a lex credendi, the law of faith of the ancient church. And they say the only lex orandi to match the lex credendi, the law of faith of the new conciliar faith, is the new liturgy. That's the reason the true reason they hate the ancient rite is because it reflects the ancient faith, the ancient ecclesiology, the ancient understanding of the Eucharist, the ancient understanding of the priesthood, the ancient understanding of hell and heaven and punishment and virtue and so forth. That's the reason they hate the ancient rite. But of course, they can't say that. They said it in not so many words. Actually, some of the main proponents of the Traditionis Custodes, which I did in a previous video you can watch, actually say that pretty much. Yeah, it's different. No, we don't want this old faith, because that old faith of the old liturgy is not the conciliar faith. So then we reject the conciliar faith. Simple as that. So the stated motivation is to protect the unity of the church. They talk peace and they create war. Same thing in politics. They accuse others of what they do. They cause division and they accuse others of causing division. They increase hatred while they accuse others of inciting hatred. They incite doctrinal destruction while accusing others of not following Vatican II, of rejecting Vatican II, which didn't teach any new dogmas. So the stated motivation is urgently to protect the unity of the church, which is threatened by council-denying traditionalists' attitudes and utterances. Oh, these evil people. Council-denying. It's like a COVID denier or something. It's a denier. Denier. Well, how about dogma-denying modernist heretics in the Vatican? How about Christian faith-denying prelates and popes? He says, well, yeah, it's true there's a bunch of self-styled rats who's pontificating aspects of the faith and the sacred liturgy on the internet. I guess I might be considered one of them. But hey, anyways, that's okay. But he says this is not really what's on the ground. You go to like pretty much any of the traditional parishes, people are not fermenting. Oh, they're not talking about denying Vatican II and all that. No, they're just going there, participating in the ancient liturgy, listening to good homilies, having the children grow up in a Christian atmosphere with other good Christians. That's pretty much what and participation in the liturgies and the various ceremonies. That's what they're there. I mean, pretty much all of them. So what you see on the internet is virtual, not in real, you go to any, not an on the ground reality. So that's what he says. So he says to overreact to this problem simply demonstrates one's insecurity in the face of it. So the overreaction shows that you guys are insecure because these rat crazies on YouTube and other places are basically touching a nerve, and you become very insecure. Because for the most part, it's true. I mean, Cardinal Ratzinger himself condemned you in 1988 to the Chilean bishops, but that's the attitude which is in the and the Jorge dictatorship. He says, look, even many bishops who aren't even like fans of the ancient liturgy know that these so-called divisions and these problems didn't even exist in their diocese. Actually, the Vatican used a fake poll of bishops, which apparently a lot of bishops said, we never received anything. And those who said we received it responded positively towards the ancient liturgy and the people and the communities. But of course, they used a fake poll to, as an excuse to come down and try to destroy the true Roman Rite and the true Catholic faith of the Roman Church, which is passed on through the ancient liturgy. Seemingly, though, there are those in the Roman Curia who sincerely believe that Traditionis Custodes will result in the disappearance of the usus antiquator, the ancient rite, the ancient use, the real use. So they believe that. Because actually that's what they said. They said, well, off-the-hand comments, like, oh yeah, that's it. We're going to finish off this ancient liturgy. We're going to finish off Summorum Pontificum, all these ancient congregations. We're going to shut them down, which is they're attempting to do. They're attempting to do. That is why actually Dom Alcuin Reid said, well, if the Vatican comes after our monastery, which was founded by the approval of the bishop, with good standing, if they come after us, try to suspend us, then we have no priest to celebrate the liturgies for us. What are we going to do? That's why he got himself ordained. He didn't actually get himself ordained. A bishop in the Vatican offered to ordain him. Anyways, we're going to go over that in a separate video. So anyways, so he says here, blind suicidal obedience is a thing of the past. Yeah, it's a thing of the past. I had blind suicidal obedience to whatever the Pope said. And I used to love John Paul II because he was a Pope who utterly rejected communion in the hand, and against the storm of American bishops and others, he rejected altar girls. Utterly rejected them. And I remember a few years later, I was going to pick up stuff at a storage unit, which we had, and I hear in the car on the news that, secular news, John Paul II has allowed altar girls in the churches. And I literally cried, because all my hope and devotion to John Paul II, like he's a defender of the faith, he will not give in to these pressures, these novelties, these suicidal innovations, which have no basis in history or fact. He gave in to them. So from that time, I think my blind suicidal obedience to whatever he says has kind of disappeared. And that's the blind suicidal obedience which has led to the destruction of the Roman Rite. If 80% or 70% or 50% of people said to Paul VI, no, or bishops and priests said, no, we will not follow this novelty, which you call novelty. We will not follow this innovation, which you call innovation. We will not follow this thing which takes a lot of our liturgical heritage away from us, as you said yourself. We will hold on to the ancient liturgy. If 50% people did that, or bishops and priests, his rite of Paul VI would have been dead letter, or very few communities would have celebrated it, and they would have died off, as most of the church has died off. So, yeah, there's no more blind suicidal obedience. We should be like Catholics of the Middle Ages, or late Middle Ages, or even early church, even like the bishops of the Eastern bishops who said to Pope Saint Victor, no, we're not going to change the day of celebrating the resurrection. We're going to follow the tradition we received, period. We don't care if you're the Pope. You are the Pope. You do have universal jurisdiction, because the bishops didn't say, hey, Victor, you deal with the Roman province. You don't have authority over us. According to the Eastern Orthodox, that would have been the right attitude, because he doesn't have authority over them. They have separate churches. But no, they never said that. Neither did St. Irenaeus when he was pleading on their behalf. They recognized the universal jurisdiction of the Bishop of Rome. Yet, they said no. And they were right. And they were vindicated. So So what did they do with this decree of Jorge? He rekindled the liturgical wars and driven people underground. It might drive, so first of all, it may rekindle liturgical wars. It may rekindle, it already rekindled the liturgical wars, because there cannot be peace between the fake Roman Rite and the real Roman Rite, the ecclesiology of the ancient Rite and the ecclesiology of the new Rite, the doctrine and dogmas of the ancient Rite and the doctrines of dogmas reflected of the new Rite of the conciliar church. Obviously, there is no peace between Jesus and Belial, Christ and the devil. So, you're calling the new Rite the devil? Not really, but what I'm calling it's a novelty and innovation. It is not outwardly heretical, but it does cause a loss of faith, especially through altar girls, communion in the hand, everybody running to the altar, and watered down prayers. So, if you have a good foundation, you have a good priest, you don't have a lot of these novelties happening, you may maintain the faith. But if you have girls running around the altar all over the place, priests not preaching good homilies, everybody receiving communion in the hand, basically like giving themselves potato chips. Where's the dip? Is the blood of Christ around so I can dip it? Dip my potato chip in the blood and eat it? You're telling people, especially children, this is the body of Christ. This is God incarnate. This is the Lamb slain from eternity. This is your maker and creator, which you can take in your hand and stick in your mouth and go. And then you see the priest at the altar, cleaning the patens, well, you gave it to 1,000 people in their hands. So how many thousands of particles of the body of Christ are on the ground, being stepped on by faithful Christians? So these, even ignoring the watered down prayers, eventually people say, well, that sounds exactly like my Episcopal friend's Mass, or my Anglican buddy's Mass. What makes it so different? They will lose the faith eventually, or at least weakened. But there is no equivalency between the ancient Roman Rite or the ancient Coptic Rite or the ancient Byzantine Rite and any of the liturgies of our separated brethren. So he says it may reignite the liturgical war or drive people underground or outside the ordinary ecclesiastical structures. And they might even destroy lives and vocations. I mean, they destroyed a lot of vocations of the Franciscan Friars of the Immaculate. They left their monastery because they said, look, we were join this traditionally oriented congregation, following the ancient charism, the rites and the devotions, and now you want to turn us into your local Franciscan tree-hugging organization? No, sorry. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Tap it already. They may increase division in the church. So, in the name of preventing division, they create division. In the name of purportedly protecting its unity. It's true. So the perceived need to resort to such drastic measures to protect the new Rite, the usus recentior, whatever the new usage, the fake Roman Rite. So they went to all these measures to protect the fake Roman Rite of Paul VI, some 50 years after its promulgation, is perhaps its greatest indictment. So it's an indictment of the fake Roman Rite, that they had to resort to such measures. They are so scared of the ancient Roman Rite that they had to attempt to suppress it and demolish it and abandon it to protect their fake creation. Shows you. Oh yeah, he talks about the congregation of the doctrine of the faith that boasted, that the prefect boasted that he and his clique and his junta would succeed in annihilating Summorum Pontificum. It's not going to happen. Even if we have to go outside the ecclesiastical structures, but I think a lot of priests and bishops are no longer listening. He says, as a liturgical historian, I cannot remain silent. And he says somewhere here, he says, I'm not a traditionalist, I'm simply a Catholic. I reject the term traditionalist. I am Catholic. That's it. Anyways, as a liturgical historian, I cannot remain silent. Legislation cannot change historical facts, nor can an act of legal positivism determine what is or is not part of the lex orandi of the Church. As the Catechism teaches, the law of prayer is the law of faith. The Church believes as she prays. So if we change the way we pray, we change what we believe. That's from the Catechism of the Catholic Church, the Catechism of Vatican II, the Catechism of John Paul II. Liturgy is a constitutive element of the holy and living tradition. That is why liturgy is so important. It's not some prayer we go to on Sunday to receive communion and go back home. Of which the bishops and first among them the Bishop of Rome are guardians, not the proprietors. So they guard the tradition they received. They don't own it. And actually, that is actually I think the last video I did, or the one before it, where again Francis attacks the traditional right again and the traditional faithful, and he says the liturgy is not. Nobody owns the liturgy. And I said in the video, yeah, you're absolutely right. Nobody owns the liturgy, not even you. As for one humble pope taught when taking possession of the cathedral in Rome, that's Benedict XVI, the pope is not an absolute monarch whose thoughts and desires are law, but that's apparently what's going on these days. On the contrary, the pope's ministry is a guarantee of obedience to Christ and to his words. He must not proclaim his own ideas about ecology and the environment and who am I to judge and all that. And the death penalty being against the gospel, and all these novelties which are garbage. Anyways, and he continues quoting Benedict XVI, what earlier generations held as sacred remains sacred and great for us too, and cannot be all of a sudden entirely, I hate that word, forbidden. What, so it could be 80% forbidden? 70% forbidden? 40% forbidden? No, it's simply, so what's been sacred before is sacred for us and great too, and cannot be forbidden, period, or even considered harmful. But that's what they are saying now, that the ancient liturgy is harmful because it reflects a non-conciliar religion. The faith of the pre-conciliar church. Oh, well, isn't that the one and only Catholic faith? So Benedict XVI says, it behooves all of us to preserve the riches which have developed in the church's faith and prayer and to give them their proper praise. So it behooves us. It's a very strong word, that word, behooves us, to preserve the riches which have developed in the church's faith and prayer, meaning liturgy. Give them their proper place, not try to suppress them. Any other conclusions fail Liturgical History 101. They wouldn't pass the theology or pastoral care courses either. All right, he actually in the article says, so this is again Dom Alcuin Reid, which I'm going to do a video on his monastery soon, next couple of days probably, if I have the time. And what he did, that he got himself, actually a Catholic bishop offered to ordain him. And is he really suspended now, or is this suspension has never been incurred? I'll give you my opinions next time. And actually in the same article he says, well, yeah, we can say, well, the Bennett, what's his name? Paul VI, promulgated it authoritatively, his missal and all that. He gives it all that stuff. It's like, as I quoted the Monsignor Klaus Gamber, yeah, maybe a pope has an authority to introduce a new rite, but he doesn't have an authority to abolish the ancient rite. Anyways, this is the video for today. Does Traditionis Custodes pass Liturgical History 101? Q, that's the question. Answer is a resounding no. No, it doesn't, and we are not bound by it because, first of all, it's an abuse of authority, and the Pope doesn't even have that authority. And don't be Pope worshippers, but know that the Pope is supposed to be the vicar of Christ, but his authority is not unlimited, as not an absolute monarch. His will is not law, and he is bound by tradition. He is bound by the faith. He cannot just do what he pleases. And no Pope dared touch the liturgy in the past. Even Pius V, his reform of the liturgy was very, very minor and only about the missal of the Roman Curia for the Diocese of Rome. That's it. Anyways, that's it. That's all. Hope you enjoyed the video. Please like, subscribe, and share. And I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.